All right, so if you remember, the last place we left Robert E. Lee was the Battle of Fredericksburg, right? He last fought against the Union when they were being led by Ambrose Burnside. And Ambrose Burnside thought that it would be a great plan to just cross right in front of Lee and that he wouldn't expect it. Unfortunately, that did not go well for Burnside. And remember, the Union lost twice as many men in that battle as or twice as many men as the Confederates did in that battle. So after Fredericksburg, Burnside is replaced by General Joseph Hooker. So Joe Hooker is, he is now in charge of those troops. They're still right outside of Fredericksburg, and he decides, when he retreats, he decides that he's going to plan a surprise attack on Robert E. Lee while he knows where he is. They just fought him, so he knows his location. So he thinks now is a perfect time. While he's right here, he thinks, that we're leaving. His guard is down. Let's surprise attack him right here. So at that time, he also outnumbered Lee's troops. So he thought it was a good opportunity. So Hooker decides to take 70,000 troops across the Rappahannock River, hoping to, loop back around and surprise the Confederates from behind. Now, Robert E. Lee, though, is a very intelligent man, and he expected this. So he actually came up with a plan to surprise attack Joe Hooker's surprise attack. What Robert E. Lee does is he leaves 10,000 troops there in Fredericksburg, and he takes 40,000 troops with him west. Leaving the 10,000 there, he tells them to, light a bunch of fires at night, set up camp like there's all 50,000 of us here. That way, if someone was to come, up to camp and just look, they would be like, oh, yes, they're still here. And they would, not know that Lee has left, actually, with the majority of his troops. So Lee takes those 40,000 west, and he splits up his army and keeps 10,000 with him, and then sends 30,000 with Stonewall Jackson to get ready and attack Hooker on the right side. They're going to loop around and attack Hooker, and so at 6, and then after that, Lee will come in, and so will the men left at Fredericksburg. So at 6 p.m. on May 2nd of 1863, Jackson's troops storm out of the woods and charge Hooker's troops while Hooker's troops are just about to eat dinner at camp that night, because the next morning they were planning on attacking Lee at Fredericksburg again, but unfortunately for them, they don't make it that long. So finally on May 5th, Hooker retreats. This was an incredible battle for Robert E. Lee. This is considered his greatest victory, and it really, it puts a lot of confidence into him. He has orchestrated this very delicate plan, and it has gone off perfectly, and Robert E. Lee has managed to secure another win for the Confederacy. Unfortunately, among the 13,000 casualties on the Confederate side at the Battle of Chancellorsville, Stonewall Jackson is one of them. He actually died on May 10th from friendly fire. A few days after the end of the battle, during the battle, he had gone into Union, sort of where the Union was, to try to look at where they were, and to get some information. And when he came back, it was dark and, chaotic during the battle. And one of the Confederate soldiers thought that he was a Union soldier and shot him, and he died on the 10th from that gunshot wound. So now that Robert E. Lee is all, proud and hopped up on confidence and feeling excellent about himself and his intelligence and his military superiority, he decides he's going to try again to invade the North. And if you remember, the last time he did that was the Battle of Sharpsburg, Antietam, and it did not go well, right? That was the bloodiest day in American history, and he was not able to win that battle. So he's going to try one more time. So in June, he begins marching north, and Hooker matches his movements, constantly staying between Lee and D.C. When Lee moves north, Hooker moves north, trying to remain a buffer between Robert E. Lee and D.C. So Abraham Lincoln's like, why are you just trying to be a buffer? Why don't you attack him? Go for it, go for it. And he doesn't do it. And he finally ends up allowing Lee to actually make it into the Union on June 24th. Lee officially invades the Union. So Lincoln is worried that Hooker is, just as bad as George McClellan. So he replaces him with George Meade. So we've got a new Union general again. So on July 1st, Lee is in Gettysburg. He's right outside of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and he hears that there's a new supply of shoes coming in, and his men really need shoes. They're not producing a lot of manufactured goods in the South, if you remember, because they didn't have the factory capability of doing that, because the manufactured goods before the Civil War were all pretty much made in the North. And they're not getting anything from Europe right now because of the Anaconda Plan and the blockade in the Atlantic. So he orders a group of his men to go into the city of Gettysburg and find this Union shipment of shoes and steal them, because his unit really needs some shoes. So while those guys are down in the city looking for shoes, they come up on some Union soldiers who had been there looking for Lee's army. And they started to fight, and this grows into eventually a 3-day battle. By that afternoon, there are 24,000 Confederates and 19,000 Union soldiers in there. By the end of day one, the Confederates were able to push the Union back to some hills along the south side of Gettysburg. And that night, Lee and Meade both reach their troops and begin working on what they want their strategy to be. Now, since Stonewall Jackson has died, Robert E. Lee needs a new right-hand man, and that right-hand man is going to be James Longstreet. James Longstreet had, been in the, these battles with Lee and Stonewall Jackson before this point, so he was a logical, successor to Stonewall Jackson. So that night, Robert E. Lee and James Longstreet are meeting in the tent, going on what they want their strategy to be. And James Longstreet basically says that the Union, while we've managed to push them back, they're in a really good position being in these hills, and it's good defense for them, and they also have some elevation to their advantage. So if we retreat now, we can make them chase us, and then we can fight wherever we want, because we can just sort of lead them to another place. And Lee is unfortunately has gotten a little cocky because of Chancellorsville, and he ignores what James Longstreet says, and he says, you know what, my men can do it. They might have the superior advantage here, but I have the superior military and mind, and I'm capable of winning this, and my men are capable of winning this. So on July 2nd, Lee's men attack the Union. The Confederates are able to, by the end of the day, break through the Union defenses and seize an unguarded hill called Little Round Top. If you look on this battle map, it's right here. They managed to get through this side and make it here. Now, that's not very far into all of the Union defenses. They've got a long way to go to really get to the center of it all. And they actually lost 9,000 men trying to get to Little Round Top. They lost 9,000 men. That's just insane. So the next day, Lee orders 15,000 men to attack Cemetery Ridge, which you see right here. They lost 9,000 men getting to this point. How many do you think they're going to lose to get to this point? Now, Lee thinks, if we can get to the center of the Union's lines, if we can get to their strongest defense, then we can manage to win this battle. So he orders a guy named George Pickett to charge at this point. And so George Pickett takes 15,000 soldiers, and he lines them up a mile wide, 3 rows deep of men, and they begin marching forward. Remember, that's our battle strategy all the time. The battle formations are just men in lines. You see in this picture, this is just men in a line. So of the 15,000 men who begin what's known as Pickett's Charge, less than half of them make it back alive, because the Union launches this massive artillery assault on these men when they begin Pickett's Charge. Reportedly, you could hear it over 200 miles away. You could hear this battle because it was so intense. Reportedly, George Pickett, turns around, eventually comes back to Robert E. Lee, and he's like, hey, that didn't work. That went horribly. And Robert E. Lee's like, what are you doing? Get back out there and charge again. And George Pickett's like, with what men? Pretty much all my men just got killed. We are running out of guys. Like, we can't keep fighting. So that's when Robert E. Lee really starts to see that he has made a serious mistake here. And on the 4th of July, the next day, the Confederates begin their retreat. So all in all, of the men present at the Battle of Gettysburg. There were 75,000 Confederate troops present at Gettysburg and 85,000 Union troops present at Gettysburg. Over 50,000 men total will die at Gettysburg, 28,000 of them Confederate, 23,000 of them Union. So this is an extremely difficult battle, and definitely is going to be one of the most important of the Civil War, because it's really going to be a turning point. From this moment, things are really going to be going downhill for the South. So at the same time that that's happening, at the same time that all these Union generals are trying to make it to Richmond, remember, Ulysses S. Grant is trying to conquer the Mississippi, and he is doing an excellent job so far. He's managed to make it all the way down to the last Confederate stronghold on the Mississippi River, which is the city of Vicksburg. Vicksburg was under the command of John Pemberton. So Ulysses S. Grant, in April of 1863, he, wants to get to Vicksburg, but he knows that if he just, goes straight for it, they'll see him coming. So he decides to try to be sneaky, and instead of coming straight, down the Mississippi and coming right to Vicksburg, he actually crosses the Mississippi, marches down the wrong side of it, past Vicksburg, so that they don't see him coming, and then crosses the river and comes back up from the south, being able to sort of surprise them. The whole way up, after he crosses the river, his whole way to Vicksburg, he fights 5 battles over a period of 17 days, and he wins all of them and finally makes it right outside of Vicksburg. When he gets to Vicksburg, he has his men surround the city, and they begin a siege. A siege is not the same as a battle. A battle is more 2 people or 2 groups fighting each other. A siege is more one group just destroying and trying to wear down the other group. And that's what's happening here. So he begins for weeks and weeks. He will just begin firing into the city. This will last for over a month. The people of Vicksburg will, their homes and everything will be totally destroyed. They'll start digging out caves into the sides of hills to hide and live, because outside of that, it's just constant bullets and, cannon and shrapnel flying all over the place. They eventually run out of food because they can't get help in because they're surrounded, and they can't get out of the city because they're surrounded. So they eventually run out of food, and people start starving to death. They eat their horses, dogs, rats, whatever they can get their hands on. And then finally, on the same day that Lee retreats at Gettysburg, John Pemberton surrenders the city of Vicksburg and his 31,000 men to Ulysses S. Grant. And only a few days later, Grant is able to capture the last fort there, which is Fort Hudson. So now Grant has total control over the Mississippi River. These 2 things, Vicksburg and Gettysburg, both taking place on the 4th of July in 1863, these 2 things right here, this is what's going to send the North, send the Union into, this new wave of energy. They've been losing, and now once they win these 2 major battles, they're able to, get some new energy and some new blood into things, and they're gonna begin to win the war after this.